It has been said that every myth has a kernel of truth deep within, so sometimes it may not be entirely wise to regard them as total superstition. The 9 Billion Names of God by Arthur C. Clarke. Read by Karl Wallace. This is a slightly unusual request, said Dr. Wagner, with what he hoped was commendable restraint. As far as I know, it's the first time anyone's been asked to supply a Tibetan monastery with an automatic sequence computer. I don't wish to be inquisitive, but I should have thought that your, establishment had much use for such a machine. Can you explain what you intend to do with it? Gladly, replied the Lama, readjusting his silk robes and carefully putting away the slide rule he had been using for currency conversions. Your Mark V computer can carry out any routine mathematical equation involving up to 10 digits. However, for our work we're interested in letters, not numbers. And we wish you to modify the output circuits. The machine will be printing words, not columns of figures. I don't quite understand. This is a project which has been working for the past 3 centuries, since the Lama was founded, in fact. It is somewhat alien to your way of thought, so I thought you might listen with an open mind while I explain it. Naturally. It's really quite simple. We have been compiling a list which shall contain all the possible names of God. I beg your pardon? We have reason to believe, continued the Lama imperiously, that all such names can be written with not more than 9 letters in an alphabet we have devised. You've been doing this for 3 centuries? Yes, we expect it will take about 50,000 years to complete the task. Oh, Dr. Wagner looked a little dazed. Now I see why you wanted to hire one of our machines. What exactly is the purpose of this project? The Lama hesitated for a fraction of a second, and Wagner wondered if he had offended him. If so, there was no trace of annoyance in the reply. Call it ritual if you like. It's a fundamental part of our belief. All the many names of the Supreme Being, God, Jehovah, Allah, and so on, they're only man-made labels. There is a philosophical problem of some difficulty here, which I do not propose to discuss, but somewhere along all the possible combinations of letters that can occur are what one might call the real name of God. By systematic permutation of letters, we've been trying to list them all. I see. You've been starting at A and working up to Z. Precisely, although we use a special alphabet of our own. Modifying the electromagnetic typewriters to deal with this is, of course, trivial. Far more interesting problem is that of devising suitable circuits to eliminate ridiculous combinations. For example, no letter must occur more than 3 times in succession. 3? Surely you mean 2? 3 is correct. Afraid it would take too long to explain. Why, even if you understood our language. I'm sure it would, said Wagner hastily. Go on. Likely, it would be a simple matter to adapt your automatic sequence computer for the work. Since words has been programmed properly, it will permute each letter in turn and print a result. What should have taken us 15,000 years we'll be able to do in 100 days. Dr. Wagner was scarcely conscious of the faint sounds from the Manhattan streets far below. He was in a different world of natural, not man-made mountains. High up in the remote areas, these monks have been patiently at work, generation after generation, compiling their list of meaningless words. Was there any limit to the follies of mankind? Still, he was given a hint of his inner thoughts. The customer was always right. There's no doubt, replied the doctor. We can modify the Mark V to print lists of nature. I'm much more worried about the problem of installation and maintenance. Getting out to Tibet in these days is not going to be easy. We can arrange that. The components are small enough to travel by air. That's one reason why we chose your machine. If we can give it to India, we can provide transport from there. You want to hire 2 of our engineers? Yes, for the 3 months that the project should occupy. I've no doubt that personnel can handle that. Dr. Wagner scribbled a note in his desk pad. There were just 2 other points. Before he could finish the sentence, the Lama had produced a small slip of paper. This is my certified credit balance of the Asiatic Bank. Thank you. It appears to be, adequate. The second matter is so trivial I hesitate to mention it. It's surprising how often the obvious gets overlooked. What sort of electrical energy have you? The Zero's inverter providing 50 kilowatts at 110 volts. It was installed about 5 years ago and is quite reliable. It has made life at the Lamasery much more comfortable. Of course, it wasn't really installed to provide power for the motors driving the prayer wheels. Of course, echoed Dr. Wagner. I should have thought of that. The view from the parapet was vertiginous, but in time one gets used to anything. After 3 months, George Hanley was not impressed by the 2,000-foot drop into the abyss or the remote checkerboard of fields in the valley below. He was leaning against the wind-smoothed stone and staring morosely at the distant mountains whose names he could never bother to discover. This, thought George, was the craziest thing that had ever happened to him. Project Shangri-La, some wit back at the labs had christened it. For weeks now, the Mark V had been churning out acres of sheets covered with gibberish. Patiently, inexorably, the computer had been rearranging letters in all their possible combinations, exhausting each class before going on to the next. As the sheets had emerged from their electromagnetic typewriters, the monks had carefully cut them out and pasted them into enormous books. In another week, heaven be praised, they would be finished. Just when obscure calculations had convinced the monks they didn't bother to go on to the world of 20s, 10s, or even 100 letters, George didn't know. One of his recurring nightmares was that there would be some change of plan, and the High Lama, whom they naturally called Sam Jaffe, though he didn't look a bit like him, would suddenly announce that the project would be extended to approximately AD 2060. They were quite capable of it. George heard the heavy wooden door slam in the wind as Chuck came in onto the parapet beside him. As usual, Chuck was smoking one of the cigars that made him so popular with the monks, who, it seemed, were quite willing to embrace all the minor and most of the major pleasures of life. There was one thing in their favor. It might be crazy, but they weren't blue noses. Those frequent trips they took down to the village, for instance. Listen, George, said Chuck urgently, I heard something that means trouble. What's wrong? Isn't the machine behaving? That was the worst contingency George could imagine. It might delay his return. Nothing could be more horrible. The way he felt now, even the sight of a TV commercial would seem like manna from heaven. At least there would be some link with home. No, it's nothing like that. Chuck settled himself on the parapet, which was unusual because normally he was scared of the drop. I've just found what all this is about. What do you mean? I thought we knew. Sure, we know what the monks are trying to do, but we don't know why. It's the craziest thing. Tell me something new, growled George. But old Sam's just come clean with me. You know the way he drops in every afternoon to watch the sheets roll out? Well, at least this time he seemed rather excited, or at least as near as he ever get to it. When I told him we were last cycle, he asked me, in that cute English accent of his, if I ever wondered what they were trying to do. I said, sure, and he told me. Go on, I'll buy it. Well, they believe when they've listed all his names, they reckon about 9 billion of them, God's purpose will be achieved. The human race will have finished what it was created to do, and there won't be any point in carrying on. Indeed, the very idea is something like blasphemy. What do you expect us to do? Commit suicide? There's no need for that. When the list is complete, God steps in and simply winds things up. Bingo. Oh, I get it. We finish our job, it'll be the end of the world. Chuck gave a nervous little laugh. That's what I said to Sam. Do you know what happened? He looked at me in a very quiet way, like I'd been stupid in class, and said, it's nothing as trivial as that. George thought it over for a moment. That's what I call taking the wide view, he said presently. What do you suppose we should do about it? Don't see it makes the slightest difference to us. After all, we already knew they were crazy. Yeah, but don't you see what will happen? When the list is complete and the last trump doesn't blow, or whatever it is they expect, we may get the blame. It's our machine they've been using. I don't like the situation one little bit. When I see, said George slowly, you've got a point there. This sort of thing's happened before, you know. When I was a kid down in Louisiana, we had a crackpot preacher who once said the world was going to end next Sunday. Hundreds of people believed him, even sold their homes. Yet when nothing happened, they didn't turn nasty as you'd expect. They decided he'd made a mistake in his calculations and went right on believing, because some of them still do. Well, this isn't Louisiana, in case you hadn't noticed. Just 2 of us and hundreds of these monks. I like him, and I'll be sorry for old Sam when his life work backfires on him. But all the same, I wish I was somewhere else. I've been wishing that for weeks. Nothing we can do at the contract's finished and the transport arrives to fly us out. Of course, said Chuck softly, we could always try a bit of sabotage. Like hell we could. That would make things worse. Not the way I meant. Look at it like this. The machine will finish its run 4 days from now, on the present 24 hours a day basis. Transport calls in a week. Okay then, all we need to do is find something that needs replacing during one of the overhaul periods. Something whole that works for a couple of days. We'll fix it, of course, but not too quickly. If this time matters properly, we can be down at the airfield when the last name pops out of the register. We'll be able to catch us then. I don't like it, said George. It's the first time I ever walked out on a job. Besides, it will make us suspicious. Now, I'll sit tight and take what comes. I still don't like it, he said, 7 days later, as the tough little mountain pony is carrying them down the winding road. Don't you think I'm running away because I'm afraid? Just feel sorry for those poor old guys up there. They don't want to be around when they find out what suckers they've been. Wonder if Sam will take it. It's funny, replied Chuck. When I said goodbye, I got the idea he knew we were walking out at him, and he didn't care because the new machine was running smoothly and the job should be finished. After that, well, for him there isn't any after that. George turned to his saddle and started up the mountain road. This was the last place from which one could get a clear view of a lamasery. The squat, angular buildings were silhouetted against the afterglow of the sunset. Here and there, lights gleamed like portholes in the side of an ocean liner. Electric lights, of course, sharing the same structures as Mark V. How much longer would they share it, wondered George. Would the monks smash up the computer in their rage and disappointment? Would they sit down quietly and begin their calculations all over again? He knew exactly what was happening on the mountain this very moment. The high lama assistants would be sitting in their silk robes, inspecting the sheets as the junior monks carried them away from the typewriters and pasted them into great volumes. No one would say anything. The only sound would be an incessant patter, the running rainstorm of keys hitting the paper. For the Mark V itself was utterly silent as it flashed to its thousands of calculations a second. 10 minutes of this, thought George, was enough to start anyone climbing up the wall. There she is, called Chuck, pointing down the valley. Ain't she beautiful? Certainly was, thought George. The battered old DC-3 lay on the highway like a tiny silver cross. 2 hours to be burning them away to freedom and sanity, with a thought worth savoring like a fine liqueur. George let it roll round his mind as the pony trudged patiently down the slope. The swift night of the high Himalayas was now almost upon them. Fortunately, the road was very good, as roads went in that region. They were both carrying torches. There was not the slightest danger, only a slight discomfort from the bitter cold. The sky overhead was perfectly clear and blazed with the familiar friendly stars. At least there would be no risk, thought George, of the pilot being unable to take off because of weather conditions. That had been his only remaining worry. He began to sing, but gave it up after a while. This vast and marina mountains, gleaming like whitely hooded ghosts on every side, did not encourage such behavior. Presently, George glanced at his watch. Should be there an hour, he called back over his shoulder to Chuck. Then he added an afterthought. When the computer's finished his run? It's due about now. Chuck didn't reply, so George swung around the saddle. You could just see Chuck's face, a white oval turned towards the sky. Look, whispered Chuck, and George lifted his eye to heaven. There's always the last time for everything. Overhead, without any fuss, the stars are going out. The end.